The Church continues to perpetuate its lies. The secret of Cain's union with his own sister, the Pope who was so insane he belonged in an asylum, and a bizarre new trend that says Jesus was actually an alien. Let's dig in. The true face of the angel of death. Who is the real angel of death? The truth might shock you because, let's clear something up right away, the Church isn't exactly upfront with its subject. The hard truth is that the Bible doesn't have an official Grim Reaper hanging around in the shadows. No dark hooded figure, no scythe. Sorry to disappoint, but Michael the Archangel isn't moonlighting as a cosmic escort to the afterlife. He is not the real angel of death. Michael, bless his celestial heart, is too busy leading heavenly battle squads and taking on spiritual heavyweights. You can think of Michael more as a divine superhero than someone clocking in for a death duty shift. Another name you might hear come up a lot is Azrael. There are many theories that claim Azrael is the angel of death, the real Grim Reaper. But in the Bible, there's no mention of him. He's not in a good book anywhere. No place, no how. But the Grim Reaper is real, right? The being certainly shows up in a lot of old texts. Islam has Malak al-Maut, their version of a death angel. Judaism claims Azrael as their official angel of death. Even Hinduism throws its hat into the death angel ring with Yama, Hindu god of death and justice, charged with the punishment of sinners. Popular culture and ancient traditions love a good spooky figure looming at the edge of mortality. But Christianity? Not so much. No Grim Reaper shows up in the scriptures. If you're picturing a single angel chilling at the pearly gates with a clipboard, let me stop you right there. Angels in Christian law are all angels of death, but only when commanded by God. What I'm saying is that Christian angels are strictly on God's payroll, doing exactly what he says, nothing more, nothing less. Take the angel in 2 Kings chapter 19 verse 35 for example. This guy or gal, angels are technically genderless and don't even need to choose which bathroom to use. He or she took out 185,000 Assyrians in one night. That's some seriously grim reaping. Who gave the order? God did. And those Assyrians, let's just say they had it coming after messing with God's people. In the book of Revelation, you'll find angels bringing about all sorts of destruction, including one who wipes out a quarter of the earth's population. That would be Revelation chapter 6 verse 8, near the very end of the world as we know it. What I'm trying to tell you is that the Bible has no specific angel of death. They all do God's bidding, but what about demons of death? There are demons in the Bible who try to stir up trouble, but they're on a pretty short leash. Remember that possessed boy in Mark chapter 9 verse 22? The demon threw him into fire and water to hurt him, but it's clear who was really in control the whole time. That would be God. Now don't even get me started on Satan. He's the so-called big bad of the spiritual realm, but throughout the Bible, he still needs a permission slip from God before doing anything nefarious. Check out Job's story. Satan has to first get clearance from God to mess with Job's stuff and health, but God draws the line at taking his life. The moral of the story is that not even the devil gets to play Grim Reaper without God's approval. So is there an angel of death or not? The angel of death as seen in popular culture today doesn't exist in Christian religious texts. Angels can carry out divine death orders. There's no singular Grim Reaper figure in the Bible. Death simply isn't personified like that. Secrets of the Forbidden Lady Pope. The Church will fight tooth and nail to keep what I'm about to tell you from being uncovered by the world at large. Whenever someone does bring it up, they denounce it as a fairy tale. But this fairy tale might be more fact than fiction. The Middle Ages was a time of castles, plagues, and popes. Lots of popes. Rumor has it one of those popes was a woman. A lady pope sat pretty on St. Peter's throne. If the rumor wasn't wild enough already, her secret was supposedly revealed when she accidentally gave birth during a church procession. Talk about an inconvenient time for a gender reveal. It's a papal mystery for the ages. The story of Pope Joan, the first undercover boss in history, first popped up in a 13th century chronicle by Jean de Mailly. According to him, there was an unnamed female pope who slipped into the role disguised as a man. Her smarts and talents landed her the gig, but she had a secret under those holy robes. De Mailly even claimed her tomb was marked with the Latin phrase, "O Peter, father of fathers, betray the childbearing of the woman pope." Subtle, right? To his credit, de Mailly admitted he wasn't sure if the story was true. He began his account with, "to be verified." Even in the Middle Ages, fake news was a thing. Jean de Mailly might have lit the spark, but it was Dominican friar Martinus Paulinus who turned Pope Joan into a medieval legend. He didn't just tell the story, he gave her a name, a backstory, and even a timeline. According to Martinus, Joan was an English woman born in Mainz. She became Pope after Leo IV's death in 855 AD, reigning for 2 years, 7 months, and 4 days. The guy loved his specifics. Martinus's account spread like wildfire. Thanks to his connections to the church, people believed his version more than earlier accounts. But not all modern historians are on board. Many scholars think parts of the story were added to Martinus's original work after his death. Essentially, nobody knows the true details of the first stories told of the Lady Pope. It's unclear how much is historical fact, how much is embellished, and how much is a downright lie. The most famous and scandalous part of the tale is Joan's dramatic reveal. A grand procession was moving through Rome. People were cheering, incense wafted through the air. Suddenly, the Pope collapsed and had a baby right there in front of everyone. Imagine the crowd's reaction. I wonder if they thought God was performing some weird miracle by having a male Pope give birth. In some versions of the story, the crowd wasn't too forgiving. Joan was reportedly dragged behind a horse and then stoned to death. So, no maternity leave? Other accounts say she survived and quietly disappeared into obscurity, with her son growing up to become a bishop. Either way, her papal days were over. Is there any truth to this wild tale? Historians are divided. Some dismiss it as a juicy piece of medieval gossip. Others point to intriguing clues that might hint at Joan's existence. Clues such as Bernini's Vatican in St. Peter's Basilica, which features sculptures of a woman in labor. Some say this is a nod to Pope Joan, though others argue it represents something completely unrelated. What's your hot take on Pope Joan? And while I'm asking questions, why can't a woman be Pope anyway? Do you think it's time for the Church to embrace the modern age? And now for a quick break. But first, I wanted to give a shout out and big thank you to Clinton Floyd and Led Ford for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. Where did Cain find his wife? It's time for another episode of the Bible's most frequently asked questions, and this one is a head-scratcher. Do you think you're up for it? The question for today is, where did Cain find a wife? Seems easy enough, right? Except, wait a second, wasn't Cain the first son of Adam and Eve, meaning there were 0 other women around besides his own mom? Gross. Let's not go there just yet. Was there a dating app in the land of Nod? A Brides of Eden matchmaker service? Skeptics love this question because it seems to stump even the most seasoned Bible readers. But don't worry, I've got answers, and they're not as tricky as they seem. If you don't know the story of Cain, here's a quick refresher. He and his brother Abel were the first sons of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve are every single person's great-great-great-grandparents according to the Bible. There were no humans in the world before them. I mean, just a few days earlier there wasn't even a world. Cain was the one who murdered Abel in a fit of sibling rage. After being marked by God as a scoundrel for his crime, Cain packed his bags and headed east of Eden to the land of Nod. For all you Steinbeck fans, now you know where the title of his famous novel comes from. According to Genesis chapter 4 verses 16 to 17, Cain settled down in the mysterious land of Nod east of Eden. He even got himself a wife and started a family. Easy peasy, case closed, right? Not quite. If Adam and Eve were the first humans, where exactly did this wife come from? Did Cain stumble across a hidden village of Nodians no one told us about? To understand, we need to explore the very specific text in the Bible, which says, "Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch." Notice something? It doesn't say Cain found a wife in Nod. It says he knew his wife there. That's biblical language for had marital relations, if you catch my drift. The implication is that Cain already had a wife when he moved to Nod. Don't even get me started on Nod itself, a place populated by who? Everyone on Earth was still lounging around Eden with Granddaddy Adam and Grandmammy Eve, right? So who were these mysterious people with their own land? The exact wording suggests Cain didn't meet a stranger in Nod. His wife went to Nod with him, hence he knew his wife. That leaves the big question, who was this mystery woman? I'm still seriously disturbed because his mom, Eve, was the only woman around. Unfortunately, this is indeed a case of family-on-family breeding. That's not something I ever want to say again. Genesis chapter 5 verse 4 tells us Adam and Eve had sons and daughters, lots of them. And since Adam and Eve were the only humans on earth at the time, Cain's wife had to be one of his sisters or possibly a niece. The general assumption is that the Bible simply neglected to mention sisters of Cain and Abel because, well, the Bible has never been particularly friendly to people with two X chromosomes. Awkward family reunions aside, the initial arrangement worked because Adam and Eve were created with perfect genetics. The mutations and DNA issues we worry about today with inbreeding hadn't kicked in yet. Not to worry, God officially banned close relative marriages during Moses' time. It says so in Leviticus chapter 18 verses 6 to 18. By then, genetic mutations had built up enough that marrying a sibling wasn't just socially askew, it was medically risky. But in the beginning, the gene pool was fresh, and yeah, Cain's wife was probably his sister. R.I.P. Goliath, the not-so-big giant. Breaking news, Goliath was not a giant. If anything, he was a giant faker. New evidence suggests he wouldn't even have gotten into the NBA. We all know the gist of who Goliath was, right? He was David's slingshot nemesis, the guy who made Israelites quake in their sandals. According to early biblical texts, Goliath stood a whopping 4 cubits and a span tall. Pretty impressive, right? How many cubits are you? Sorry, let me translate. In plain English, that's 7 feet 10 inches. Definitely not someone you'd want to face off against in a pickup basketball game. But hold up, what if Goliath wasn't actually that tall? What if 4 cubits and a span wasn't meant to describe a dude towering over everyone, but was more metaphorical? After all, the Bible is full of metaphors. It's a theory archaeologist Jeffrey Chadwick of Brigham Young University shared at a recent virtual conference. Jeffrey has been digging into the ancient Philistine city of Gath, Goliath's hometown, and he's uncovered some fascinating stuff. When I say digging, I mean he's physically excavating the city. In 2019, Gath's city gate was unearthed. Now I want you to guess how tall the city gate was. Correct, 4 cubits and a span, aka 7 feet and 10 inches. The walls of Gath where Goliath lived were the exact size the Bible says Goliath was. Doesn't that seem a little suspicious to you? Chadwick doesn't think it's a coincidence. He suggested that the Old Testament writer might have been comparing Goliath's size and strength to the defensive walls of his hometown. In other words, Goliath's size was a metaphor. He wasn't a real giant. He wasn't a son of the Nephilim. He was just an ordinary guy. Let's zoom out for some more context. Gath, first settled by Canaanites nearly 4,700 years ago, was later rebuilt by the Philistines, who were the Israelites' not-so-friendly neighbors. By the time Goliath's story takes place around 3,000 years ago in the Iron Age, Gath was at its peak. Archaeological digs at the site, called Tel Es-Safi, have turned up pottery with inscriptions similar to the name Goliath. They've also found evidence of the city's dramatic destruction by an invading army roughly 2,850 years ago. All these findings point to the biblical struggle between the Philistines and the Israelites being true. Chadwick's findings add a new twist to the discussion, suggesting Goliath's legendary stature might not have been about his height, but his symbolic largeness. The Bible was saying that Israel, the pint-sized underdog, toppled the big bad giant that was Philistine. Do you accept that Goliath may not have been a giant? If so, you might have to accept that a lot of what's been purported as factual in the Bible is nothing but mere metaphor. Yes, Jesus was an alien. Jesus is in league with extraterrestrials, and the church knows and is lying about it. There are some people so convinced of Jesus' alien origins they've developed an entire new religion around the idea. It's best to start at the beginning here. In 1954, a London cab driver named George King heard a voice in his head. It wasn't his conscience. No, it was way crazier than that. George heard the voice of Master Aetherius, an alien intelligence from Venus. Hey, we've all been there, right? Well, maybe not. The alien voice told George to prepare himself because he was to become the voice of interplanetary parliament. Forget boring old government debates. The interplanetary parliament has flying saucers and cosmic wisdom. A year later, in 1955, George King was full E.T. meets guru. His life did a massive 360. He went from driving a taxi to founding the Aetherius Society. Their mission to this day is to spread the teachings of advanced extraterrestrial intelligence, which they refer to as their cosmic masters. These cosmic masters include wise historical figures like Jesus, Buddha, and Confucius. The Aetherius Society believes such teachers were aliens sent to enlighten humankind. Should we go deeper into this madhouse? Sure, why not? George King crowned himself the primary terrestrial mental channel, a title you've probably never heard before. He started channeling messages from space beings with the intention to heal the world through love, prayer, and cosmic truth. The Aetherius Society's theology boils down to this: aliens exist and they're spiritually advanced beings who occasionally pop down to Earth to help us out. You know Gandhi? Well, he was a cosmic master too. All these years later, and the Aetherius Society is still around, bigger and more influential than ever. You may even know someone who's a secret member. They have chapters in 11 countries and headquarters in both London and Los Angeles. Putting aside the Aetherius Society's belief system, could they be onto something? Was Jesus Christ truly from the far reaches of space? I cannot offer you any proof in either direction, but I can say that Christ certainly didn't act like a normal person. He performed miracles, resurrected the dead, and spoke of esoteric knowledge so astounding humanity could hardly fathom it. It all sounds like something an alien would do. The weirdest beings in the Bible. You've heard of angels and you've heard of demons, but what about the creatures known as the Hayat? They're the celestial MVPs of Jewish and Christian lore. Imagine a cross between divine bodyguards, throne bearers, and a cosmic conglomeration of weirdness. The Hayat can be found in the vision of the prophet Ezekiel. In the Bible, Ezekiel was having one of those days where reality decides to take a back seat. It was one of those weird days that nothing seems like real life. Then, rather suddenly, he witnessed a heavenly chariot powered by 4 creatures that looked like they wandered out of a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Each one of the creatures had 4 faces: man, lion, ox, and eagle. Each face looked to one of the cardinal points, so they never had to turn their bodies. They were accompanied by flaming wheels that were covered in eyes. It was such a bizarre sight that Ezekiel must have questioned the safety of those funky mushrooms he ate earlier. Now scholars tell us these creatures are cherubim, which isn't the same as those chubby baby angels you see in greeting cards. These are the hardcore cherubim only the Bible, in its infinite strangeness, can come up with. Some call them cherubim, but Hayat is their name in Hebrew. They don't only appear in Ezekiel's vision. These creatures show up in the texts of the Second Temple, in the macabre literature of Judaism, in the Book of Revelation, in the Zohar, and in the New Testament. But they're never quite the same. In the Book of Revelation, the prophet John gives them a bit of a makeover. You might call it a glow-up even. John of Patmos takes Ezekiel's creatures and upgrades them. In Revelation chapter 4 verse 6-8, John's 4 living beings still have the lion, ox, man, and eagle vibes, but this time they have 6 wings. And let's not forget the eyes. The 4 living Hayat monsters have sprouted eyes all over their bodies. What's the deal with all these peepers? Scholars say it symbolizes being alert and all-knowing. Think of them as celestial security cameras that never run out of battery. The Hayat are like God's twisted mutant security guards that creep up on you while you're just trying to buy groceries. What scholars can't figure out is why the same 4 creatures appear time and time again in religious writings. One fun theory is that they represent 4 signs of the zodiac: Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. I'm wondering where the other 8 signs are. But like so much else that has to do with the Bible, there's no proof. It's possible that after thousands of years, the original meaning has been lost forever. What do you think the Hayat symbolize? Myth and reality of the man himself, King David. Who was King David anyway? Did you know the hero of the Old Testament is considered by a lot of scholars to have never existed? Let's see if the stories behind Goliath's arch nemesis are true, and if he really did capture Jerusalem as his capital 3,000 years ago. You should know that the idea of King David conquering Jerusalem is based entirely on the Bible. There are no archaeological clues, other written records, or chiseled inscriptions to back up King David as a historical figure. Is it possible? Of course, but no one can prove it. Let's back up to the birth of Jerusalem. Jerusalem isn't some fly-by-night village that popped out of nowhere. Excavations have shown that people have been living there for, about 5,000 years. The city of David, now known as Silwan, is where most of the action took place. Archaeologists, led by the late Professor Yigal Shiloh, even found a stepped structure dating to David's alleged time in the city, circa 1000 BC. Some think the structure might be the foundation of the Jebusite stronghold the Bible claims David conquered. Might is the key word here. When it comes to King David, you're going to hear a lot of mights and maybes. Jerusalem even makes a cameo in Egyptian records from 1900 BC. It was an enemy of Egypt at the time. There are records from the 14th century BC of King Abdu-Heba of Jerusalem writing brown-nosed letters to Pharaoh Akhenaten. The king was desperate for the pharaoh not to crush his little kingdom. It looks like some things never change. People have been sucking up to the boss since forever. Okay, so Jerusalem was real and it played a significant role in the events of the Levant. But if King David was so important, wouldn't his name have been left mentioned somewhere? I don't know if you've been to Egypt, but those pharaohs made good and sure they would never be forgotten. In 1993, archaeologists led by Professor Avraham Biran found a stone inscription at the site of Tel Dan. This basalt beauty, dating to the 9th century BC, mentions the House of David. If I had a mic, this would be where I'd drop it. The discovery marked the first time King David's name was found anywhere outside of the Bible. However, it's still not proof. It's like a blurry photo of Bigfoot. It could be proof, but it's just not convincing enough for everyone. It all boils down to one big question. Is the Bible myth, reality, or a mix of both? The one thing scholars are sure of is that the Bible wasn't written to give us a neat history lesson. It's more of a morality tale designed to keep people loyal to God. The stories of people like Abraham, Moses, and Joshua are a mix of legend, theology, and some truth. Archaeology often gives these tales a side-eye. For example, Joshua supposedly steamrolled Canaanite cities in the 14th century BC, but modern excavations show many of these cities were rubble long before Joshua showed up. Oops. Even David's story, as told in the books of Samuel, is a mixed bag. Some bits, like officer lists, might date to his time, but other parts, let's just say there's a lot of creative editing. Scholars like Professor Israel Finkelstein argue that the stories were shaped by the concerns of later writers, such as the Deuteronomists, who compiled the tales centuries after David's reign. An awesome example of the confusion can be found in the details of how David conquered Jerusalem in the first place. According to the Bible, David's men sneaked into the city through a gutter. In 1865, Charles Warren discovered a shaft leading to the Gihon Spring, which many thought was the infamous gutter from the Bible. This seemed to confirm part of the story. How much of David's myth do you attribute to real life? Let me know in the comments. He was the weirdest pope in history. Remember that time the Pope put the rotten corpse of another pope on trial? If not, you're in for a real surprise. The Vatican of the 9th and 10th centuries was bonkers. Being pope was less about saving souls and more about playing the Game of Thrones, minus the dragons but with infinitely more backstabbing. If you thought modern politics was messy, let me introduce you to the Cadaver Synod, the time Pope Formosus was dug up and dragged to court. It was medieval justice at its weirdest. Do you even give a corpse a lawyer? In January 897, 9 months after Pope Formosus had shuffled off his mortal coil, his successor, Pope Stephen VI, decided the man's corpse still had questions to answer. He ordered the body exhumed. Then it was dressed in full papal regalia. God forbid the corpse be naked. Next, Formosus's cadaver was plopped on a throne to face charges like perjury and coveting the papacy. The scene that followed was one only Nicolas Cage could properly act out. Stephen VI, fully alive, if not entirely sane, shouted at a corpse while a poor trembling deacon crouched behind Formosus's chair trying to defend him. "Why did you usurp the papacy?" Stephen bellowed. And the deacon, so scared that he would be put on trial next, replied that it was because the late Pope Formosus was evil. The deacon was a terrible, terrible defense attorney. Let's back up to before this craziness started and see if we can't find some logic behind it. Born around 816 AD in Ostia, Formosus worked as a missionary in Bulgaria and France before climbing the ecclesiastical ladder. By 872, he was already a big deal, but the Vatican politics were spicier than a medieval stew. Pope Joan VIII accused Formosus of being too popular in Bulgaria and excommunicated him, fearing he might steal the papal throne. Some years went by and John VIII was assassinated. First poisoned, then beaten with a hammer. Ouch, That would suck. Formosus came back from his excommunication and became pope in 891. After making everyone in Europe angry with his decrees, Formosus died in 896, possibly from poison. His replacement, Boniface VI, lasted 2 weeks before dying from... Wait, hold on. Yep, it was probably poison. A lot of poisoning going on in the Vatican in those days. Then came Pope Stephen VI, a man with a grudge, some questionable mental stability, and a penchant for theatrical justice. The cadaver synod was a complete farce. Stephen VI stripped Formosus's body of its robes, cut off the fingers he used for blessings, and had him reburied in a pauper's grave. It was all a bunch of silly drama, and soon the Roman people had enough of it. In August 897, they revolted, tossed Stephen VI in jail, and that was where he died. The Cadaver Synod remains one of the most bizarre chapters in papal history. It's a mix of petty grudges, power grabs, and truly unhinged behavior. Historians like Elizabeth Harper and Richard Stockton have dissected the insanity, and honestly, it feels more like the script of a dark comedy than actual history. Who would want to be pope anyway when you're just going to be poisoned? Was Mary really a prostitute? How many of Mary Magdalene's sins are real? She's been called a prostitute, Jesus' closest confidant, his 13th apostle, and even his wife. The truth of Mary's life is not what you're going to be expecting. Mary Magdalene wasn't just some background character in the Bible. She was there at Jesus' crucifixion, watching her friend and spiritual leader suffer. She saw him buried, and she was the one who discovered his tomb empty. Talk about being in the right place at the right time. Michael Haag, a historian who's done his homework, points out that Mary Magdalene was Jesus' go-to person during some of the most defining moments in his ministry. From the healing miracles in Galilee to the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, she was at Jesus' side. I think we could all use a friend like Mary. But why do so many Christians believe she was a prostitute? The Bible explicitly tells us she was Jesus' bestie. In fact, there's absolutely no mention of Mary being a prostitute in any of the New Testament Gospels. Who started spreading the rumor? Historian Dr. Hetta Howes is here to clear up some confusion. According to the doctor, Mary as a sinner was a narrative cooked up in the Middle Ages. Some medieval writers got a bit too creative and decided it was a good idea to make her a penitent prostitute who washed Jesus' feet with perfume. These writers took the original biblical texts and made them a little spicier. They thought the Mary character could use a little more oomph. Pope Gregory the Great certainly didn't help her reputation. In 591, Gregory took it upon himself to merge Mary Magdalene with another unnamed sinner from the Bible, enforcing her position as a sex worker. All these years later, this version of Mary still sticks. Part of the reason is likely because people love a good redemption story. I know these days it seems like people have a short attention span, but apparently that's nothing new. The sick punishments of the Apostle Peter. Peter was one of Jesus Christ's 12 disciples. After Christ's death, he went on to write one of the most heinous texts of the first century, filled with terrifying descriptions of infernal punishments that would make the Texas Chainsaw Massacre guy sleep with a nightlight on. This text is known as the Apocalypse of Peter. It's considered apocalyptic and pseudepigraphal. In other words, it's a manuscript relating to the end of days that was never officially included in any Bible. It's not even accepted that Peter wrote the text. It's attributed to Peter, but many scholars say it definitely wasn't him. It was someone else with torture on the brain. The text describes a divine vision experienced by Peter. There's some information about the second coming of Christ. Then the work goes off the rails. It starts detailing the infernal punishments that all those who are damned must suffer. This is where sensible people will skip to the next video. Things are going to get terrible. The Apocalypse of Peter says that sinners will be, and keep in mind this isn't a full list, hanged by their tongues, thrown in a pit of fire, hung by their hair over a bubbling mire, hung by their private parts, tormented by worms, tossed into pits of excrement, chased by aborted babies shooting fire from their eyes, poked with hot irons, swarmed by flesh-hungry birds, and, of course, whipped by fire rods. Think about this list the next time you decide to commit a sin. What's the craziest thing you heard today? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and come back again soon for more videos from the channel.